She called him 4 hours before she died. She said she was feeling fine. She was on her way to work. She was talking to a man she trusted, a man she had designated as the person who would tell the world what happened to her if she could no longer tell them herself. And then, sometime in those hours that followed, she was gone. Amy Escridge was 34 years old. She held a United States government security clearance. She was actively working with the Department of Homeland Security on a project to protect Americans traveling on public transit from biological and chemical attack. She was a scientist of sufficient demonstrated ability and mental stability that the federal government entrusted her with sensitive national security work. And she spent the year before she died documenting, in photographs, in written communications, in the testimony of co-workers who were present when it happened, a sustained campaign of harassment that included directed energy weapon attacks on her body. She sent texts to multiple people. They all said the same thing. If you hear I committed suicide, I did not. Then she was found dead from what was officially ruled a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Huntsville, Alabama, a city that is home to a NASA space center. Amy Escridge is one of at least 11 United States scientists, researchers, and defense-connected intelligence professionals who are dead or missing under circumstances that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is now formally investigating. Together, they represent a pattern that the White House and Congress have been briefed on, and that has produced an unprecedented federal investigative response. This report tells their stories. It tells them with the seriousness they deserve, the detail that the public has not been given, and the attention to the human dimensions that gets lost when this story is framed as a conspiracy theory rather than what it actually is. A national security investigation into the systematic deaths and disappearances of American defense researchers. These were people. They had families. They had work they cared about. They had knowledge that mattered, not just as abstract classified information, but as scientific achievement and human intellectual accomplishment. And they are gone. Some of them died. Some of them simply disappeared, walking away from everything they owned, never to be seen again. All of them deserved better than what happened to them. And all of them deserve to have their stories told. Amy Escridge's story is the one that has to be told first, because she had the foresight to make sure it could be told. Before she died, she spent a year building a record. She communicated daily with Frank Milbourne, a former British intelligence officer she had found through an online connection, and whose background she recognized as giving him the framework to understand what was being done to her. She chose him deliberately. She told him, "Because of your background, you will believe what I am saying, because you will understand the tradecraft." She went on, "If anything happens to me, here is all the evidence, and I want you to get it out there." Milbourne became what she called her dead man switch, the person who would activate the record she had built if she could no longer do it herself. The evidence she left with him includes text messages documenting threats against her, photographic documentation of injuries to her hands that a physician assessed as consistent with directed energy microwave weapon exposure, documentation of witness testimony from coworkers who were present when she was attacked and who identified the weapon being used, and a year of detailed communications describing the escalating campaign that had been directed at her. The campaign began with vehicle surveillance. Someone was watching her, tracking her pattern of life, which is the intelligence term for learning where a target is at any given hour of the day, when they arrive at work, when they leave, when they are at home, when they are in a place that presents an opportunity for the next stage of operation. She noticed. She documented it. It escalated to systematic digital intrusion. Her computers and her phones were being hacked so persistently that she performed complete reinstalls of her digital systems every other day. Every other day, she was rebuilding her operating environment from scratch because the intrusions were continuous and she could not secure her systems against the persistent technical assault. She removed the wireless card from at least one computer to prevent network-based hacking, creating what is called an air gap, a device not connected to any network and theoretically inaccessible to remote intrusion. They responded by deploying directed energy weapons to attempt to read what she was typing on that air-gapped computer. A directed energy weapon can build a three-dimensional model of an object, including a human hand on a keyboard, by bouncing focused energy off it and reading the reflection. When Escridge was at her air-gapped computer, someone with a directed energy emitter positioned outside her workspace was attempting to read her keystrokes through the building's walls. Her hands were burned in the process. The burns were photographed. The photographs were assessed by a physician. The burns were consistent with microwave energy exposure. She worked with Homeland Security on the subway defense project despite all of this. She went to work every day. She communicated with Milbourne from her car on the way in. She communicated with him from her workplace with her coworkers present. She was, by every available measure, a functioning, effective, highly capable scientist who was under sustained external attack and who was continuing to produce the work she had committed to producing. Milbourne's assessment, submitted to Congress, is that she did not commit suicide. His position, and the position of the coworkers who knew her, and the position of the friends who received the same messages she sent him, is unequivocal. She told them she would not do this to herself. She was not showing signs of suicidal ideation to the people who knew her best and spoke with her most frequently. She was showing signs of a person under sustained threat who was refusing to stop doing the work she believed in. The official ruling of self-inflicted gunshot wound in Huntsville, Alabama, near NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, after a year of documented harassment, after explicit pre-death statements to multiple witnesses that she would not harm herself, is the element of this case that the FBI is now in a position to examine with the forensic and investigative resources that should have been applied from the beginning. The other scientists in this cluster deserve the same individual attention that Amy Escridge has received, because their stories are equally specific and equally important. General William Neal McCaslin's disappearance is, in some ways, the most consequential case in the entire cluster, because of what he knew and what his knowledge represents. He commanded the Air Force Research Laboratory. He oversaw the funding for 80% of the United States military's special access programs. He was, as a former FBI supervisory agent described him, a walking hard drive of highly classified information. He knew which programs existed, what they had achieved, who was working on them, how they were funded, and where they were going. He knew things about the American classified research enterprise that very few people in the world know, and that adversaries would assign extraordinary value to acquiring. His disappearance was not the disappearance of a person in crisis. He left without his cell phone, without his prescription glasses, without his smartwatch, without his keys. He took a firearm and hiking boots. His wife, in her emergency call, was specific. She did not believe he was in danger. She believed he had decided not to be found. Shortly after he was gone from his home, a gray Air Force sweatshirt, the only item that would have directly identified him as associated with the military, was found discarded by the side of a road. The deliberate removal of identifying material, including the discard of the one garment that connected him to his military identity, is the behavior of a person who is trying to disappear from traceable view. Whether that decision was made freely, under his own judgment and for reasons he chose, or under some form of external pressure or coercion, is the question the investigation must answer. Joshua LeBlanc was 29 years old. He was working on nuclear propulsion at NASA in Huntsville, Alabama. He was reported missing at 4:30 in the morning. His wallet, keys, and phone were at home. Huntsville police searched for him through the day. At 2:45 that afternoon, his Tesla burned in a crash severe enough that his body was unidentifiable for 3 days afterward. When investigators accessed the Sentry system in the Tesla, they found the vehicle had been parked at the Huntsville airport for 4 hours the morning he was reported missing. A 29-year-old nuclear scientist whose body was unidentifiable for 3 days after a fiery crash, whose vehicle had spent 4 hours at an airport the same morning he was reported missing from home. This is not a story that the official narrative of an accidental crash begins to explain. What was he doing at the airport? Was the vehicle at the airport under his control? Was he in it during those 4 hours? Those are the questions that should have been answered before any investigation was closed. Monica Reza was a researcher at the Air Force Research Laboratory working on advanced materials science, specifically an alloy called manderley, engineered for extreme heat resistance for rocket systems. She disappeared during a hike in the Angeles National Forest in California. She was with a friend on the trail. The friend was slightly ahead of her, turned back to check on her, and received a wave and a smile in response. A few minutes later, the friend turned back again. Monica was gone. An extensive search found nothing. In 10 minutes, without any visible precipitating event, a fit young researcher had simply ceased to be present on a trail in a national forest. Melissa Casillas was an administrator at both Los Alamos National Laboratory and the Air Force Research Laboratory. She brought her daughter a sandwich for lunch on the day she disappeared. She returned home and said she would work from home. She was captured on surveillance camera walking briskly away from her home in the early afternoon, heading eastbound. She left behind her work phone, which had been factory reset. She left behind her personal phone, which had also been factory reset. She left behind her keys. She left behind her wallet. A shoe that may have been hers was found near a canyon. She was never found. The factory reset of both phones before her departure is the detail that distinguishes her case from a simple voluntary disappearance. A person who intends to leave and start over has reasons to wipe their phones before going, to erase the contacts and communications that would allow someone to find them. But the complete erasure of digital history before departure is also what an intelligence operation does to a target before moving them, to eliminate the trail that would allow investigators to reconstruct the target's recent contacts and activities. The ambiguity of this detail is exactly what a sophisticated operation would be designed to produce. Stephen Garcia built components for nuclear weapons as a government contractor connected to the Air Force Research Laboratory. He went for a walk and did not come back. He left behind his phone, his watch, his identification. The simplicity of his disappearance, so close to the template shared by the other cases, is its own form of evidence. Matthew Sullivan was a former Air Force intelligence officer. He was scheduled to testify before Congress at a whistleblower hearing about UAP intelligence within the military. He died before that testimony could occur. The specific timing of his death, in relation to the scheduled testimony, is a data point that experienced investigators do not dismiss without examination. The question that has to be asked, directly and with the seriousness it deserves, is what happened to the early warning signs in this case, and why they did not produce the investigative response they should have generated. Amy Escridge went to the FBI. She engaged with the Bureau for 3 months, according to Frank Milbore, discussing her concerns and providing documentation. At the end of that engagement, she was told the FBI did not have jurisdiction over her case. That response, from the Domestic Counterintelligence Authority of the United States government to a government-cleared scientist reporting a campaign of directed energy weapon attacks on her person, is difficult to understand at face value. Directed energy weapon attacks on American citizens conducted by foreign or foreign-directed actors fall squarely within the counterintelligence mandate of the FBI. The Bureau has jurisdiction over counterintelligence operations on American soil. If Escridge's account was credible, and the physical evidence of injuries and the witness testimony of coworkers who identified the weapon type in real time suggests it was, the FBI had both the authority and the obligation to investigate. The assertion that it lacked jurisdiction represents either an institutional error, a failure of assessment at the level of the agents she dealt with, or something more difficult to contemplate, that the responsible parties had somehow influenced the institutional response to her reports in a way that prevented the engagement that should have followed. Milbourne has noted that the harassment campaign against Escridge was designed specifically to make her reports appear consistent with the behavior of a mentally unstable individual to anyone unfamiliar with the specific tradecraft being applied. Vehicle surveillance, systematic hacking, directed energy weapon attacks, social isolation. These are the components of what intelligence professionals call a full-spectrum harassment program, and they are designed, in part, to ensure that the target's account of what is happening to her sounds implausible to institutional ears that lack the framework to evaluate it. Whether the FBI's 3-month engagement with Escridge was a genuine effort that failed because the agents involved lacked the counterintelligence framework to assess what she was describing, or whether it was a more troubling kind of failure, the consequence was the same. Escridge continued to be subjected to the harassment campaign. She continued to document it. And eventually, she died. The FBI has now entered this cluster of cases without waiting to be invited. That entry, which is a significant departure from standard protocol, suggests that the institutional assessment has changed. Something about the pattern, most likely the combination of McCaslin's disappearance and congressional pressure from members with direct Intelligence Committee experience, has produced a different institutional posture than the one that told Amy Escridge the Bureau lacked jurisdiction. Congress is demanding hearings. Representatives with direct knowledge of the classified programs these scientists were connected to have pushed this investigation forward. Luis Elizondo, whose first-hand experience with the government's classified UAP investigation programs gives him specific context for understanding what these researchers were working on and who might have an interest in suppressing it, has added his voice to the calls for accountability. The families of the dead and missing are afraid to speak. That fear is itself the most human expression of what this pattern represents. These are people who loved someone, who worked in service of their country, who applied their intellect and their education to research that was supposed to make the United States safer and stronger, and who are now gone. And the people who loved them are too afraid of what speaking might cause to add their voices to the public record. This is the 4th month that some of these families have been waiting. Some of them have been waiting longer. And none of them have received answers that satisfy the evidence in front of them. That absence is not acceptable. And the investigation that Congress has demanded and the FBI has entered is the mechanism through which it has to be addressed. If you have been following this story, make sure you are here for the next development. Subscribe so that when the investigation produces its next visible output, you hear it immediately. Because this is the kind of story where the next development can be the one that changes everything. What does it mean for a country when 11 researchers working in its most sensitive research programs die or disappear in ways that cannot be explained by the official accounts assigned to them? It means that the architecture of protection that surrounds those programs, the security clearances, the institutional oversight, the counterintelligence surveillance, has not been sufficient to protect the people doing the work from whatever is reaching them. It means that the knowledge those individuals carried, developed over years of education and research and practical application within classified environments, has been lost, or taken, or suppressed. And it means that the people responsible for whatever reached them have been operating within American borders, within American research institutions, within proximity to American government facilities, for long enough to develop and execute a pattern that produced 11 victims before the institutional machinery of accountability began to respond. Amy Escridge documented what was happening to her for a year. She left a record. She left it with someone she trusted. She told that person explicitly what to do with it if she could no longer speak for herself. And then she was found dead. Joshua LeBlanc was 29 years old. He was working on the nuclear propulsion technology that will make deep space exploration possible for human beings. His Tesla sat at an airport for 4 hours before he burned in a crash so severe that his body was unidentifiable for 3 days. Monica Reza waved and smiled at a friend on a hiking trail and then was gone in 10 minutes. Her research into advanced heat-resistant alloys was the enabling science for the next generation of rocket systems. Melissa Casillas wiped both her phones before she walked away from her home and never came back. She knew every administration detail of 2 of the most significant classified research facilities in the country. Matthew Sullivan was going to testify before Congress about what he knew. He did not make it to that testimony. General McCaslin discarded the sweatshirt that identified him as belonging to the Air Force and disappeared without his phone, without his glasses, without anything that would allow him to be traced or identified. He carried a firearm. He wore boots built for difficult terrain. His wife knew, from something in what she observed before he left, that he had decided not to be found. These are people. They are not data points in a conspiracy theory. They are human beings whose work mattered, whose lives mattered, and whose deaths and disappearances have not been adequately explained, adequately investigated, or adequately acknowledged by the institutions that were supposed to protect them. The FBI's investigation is open now. Congress is watching it. Luis Elizondo, who knows more than he has been able to say publicly about what these researchers were connected to, is watching it. The evidence that Amy Escridge left behind, submitted to Congress by Frank Milbour at personal risk, is in the official record. What happens next in this investigation is not yet written. Whether it produces the accountability that these individuals and their families deserve depends on whether the institutions that have entered it maintain the commitment to follow the pattern wherever it leads, including to conclusions that are uncomfortable for powerful interests. What is already written is the pattern itself: 11 deaths and disappearances, specific research areas of extraordinary strategic value, a commanding officer who connected all of them and who is now himself gone. Behavioral signatures that repeat across cases in ways that probability cannot explain as coincidence. A scientist who documented her own targeting for a year and who was found dead from the exact kind of death she told the world she would not inflict on herself. That is the record. The FBI has it, Congress has it, the public now has it. What the country does with it is the question that will define not just the resolution of these cases, but the degree to which the people who dedicate their lives and their intellect to American defense and research can count on the institutions of their country to protect them. Amy Escridge trusted the right person with the right evidence. She made sure her record survived her. The least these institutions can do is make sure it does not go to waste.